Hello, Dr. Ron Eglin, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about MongoDB, which is a good old NoSQL database. Really, this is you should have some experience with relational databases before starting this, because what I'm going to be doing is using an example from my COP 4709 class for that. And the example we're going to be using is this example right here, which we call as the restaurant menu database. And oops, I didn't want to make that large. In the restaurant menu database, the concept is that you've got menu items, menu groups, and a menu which contains items, and the items belong to a group. This is actually kind of simple stuff where you're saying that the group that a menu item could belong to would be like appetizers or the lunch menu. It's just a group on an existing menu. So in the class, we spent a lot of time figuring out how to model this and being able to make those models work. What we're going to do in MongoDB is a little bit different because, well, MongoDB is a little bit different. If you go to the MongoDB documentation, which you should look through a lot of the different documentation that's associated with the database, if you're used to using JSON, this should be relatively easy for you. So if you're in the JavaScript world and you've modeled data with JSON, this is going to look almost exactly alike. Actually, it is exactly alike. So but we're going to go over here to MongoDB, and in MongoDB, we have a tool that we're going to use called Compass that actually comes with MongoDB if you go to the download from MongoDB. And what it is it allows you to create and edit databases in MongoDB. We're going to look at the querying of the databases later, but right now we're going to kind of think about how we want to model that data. So if I go to this data that I'm talking about, I got to really rethink the way that I do this, because in a NoSQL database, you can model many-to-one relationships. It's actually easier to model few-to-one relationships, but there really is no modeling for many-to-many relationships when you're talking about large amounts. You kind of have to rethink using the NoSQL database if that's the type of data that you're dealing with. Relational databases are very good and very optimized for doing this. However, NoSQL databases are not. So they're not appropriate for that type of situation. In fact, if you go to the documentation for MongoDB and for NoSQL databases, you'll see that they just don't even cover it whatsoever. And it just isn't there. So let's go ahead and see how we can do this. Let's create a database, and I'm going to call this database Restaurant Menu. And I'm going to make a collection. I have to have collections in there. I can make more than one. And I'm going to call this collection Chili's Menu. Now, this doesn't mean that this is the way that you would have to model this. I'm actually going to put the Chili's menu into the database restaurant menu. And I could call the database restaurant menus if I wanted to. Let's call it menus. Let's create the database, and there it is. So if I go to this database and I've got the collection name of Chili's menu, I can go to the Chili's menu by clicking on it. And as you see, there's nothing there. Well, I'm going to go over here to Chili's, and I'm going to look at their menu. So I brought up their menu, and specifically right now I've brought up their appetizers menu. And as you can see, there's more than one menu. These would be what we call menu groups: burgers, ribs and steaks, fajitas. Okay, those are all just groupings of a menu. If I go to the appetizers menu right here, I can see that I've actually got a number of appetizers like the Triple Dipper, the Awesome Blossom Petals. And I want to come over here and think about how I would model that. Let's insert a document here, and this brings up a document tool. And if I think about this, okay, so how am I going to model these elements? Well, in the world of MongoDB and JSON data, you kind of start at the lowest level. So we could say, well, what's the lowest level here? Well, the menu item really is kind of the basic thing that you want to model. So these are going to be what we'll do is we'll actually have them as menu items. Now, I can make this object ID a little bit different, so I don't need the ID to be an object ID. I could. I'm actually going to change that. I'm going to make it a string, and I'm going to make the ID actually be the name of this. So Triple Dipper could be the ID that goes with this. Well, realize that if you're going to do that, you're also taking a risk, because you can't have more objects with the same ID. They should be unique. And then I can say, well, let's go a little bit deeper here. For this ID, the Triple Dipper, I could then go ahead and say, well, let's give it a name. I can use, well, actually, I'll use just lowercase here. And it would be the Triple Dipper. And I have the ability to go here and add another field. So that was a string, by the way, and I could put in, let's say, a description. If you look at the number of fields that I have, the description would be 3 appetizers in 1. Appetizers in 1 for dipping, because that's what they're really made for. This isn't what I'm definitely not promoting this kind of food for anybody to eat. There I've actually got some sort of thing here. I've got an ID and a name, and it's all there. And I have an ability to go in here and edit it. I can make updates. Now, this whole thing here has one slight problem with it, is that I've got one item on here. And I really want to have more than one item. So what I want to do is I need to reorganize this so that I could actually have more than one item. I also want to show you here, this is a list view and this is a table view. Now on the table view, you can actually see the ID string, the name string. This is kind of now looking more like a row, which is what you would expect. And if I go here, so what I could do is I could then say, well, let's make a copy of it and, clone, and insert that clone there. And now you can notice that the clone has an ID, and that ID actually is an object ID, and the name string is Triple Dipper. And now it's actually kind of looking a little bit like what you would expect. I have the multiple menu items here. So if I go back to here, and let's see, I think I can edit this as an object ID. Maybe I can't. Let's see, I go up here and, I can go through the update process to do this. So I could change this back, or I could go to the list view, and in the list view, if I hit edit, and I go up to here and I say, you know what, I don't want it to be a string. I want it to be an object ID. Okay, the document actually contains errors. The object ID needs to become an object ID. So I would need to figure out a way to get past the update not permitted while document contains errors, because the value of this object ID is not actually an object ID. So I would have to make that an object ID. Well, it's more than just being able to put in random characters here. So right off the bat, I kind of made this, well, may have made a mistake in how I did this. Well, that's not really a problem, because what I could just do is simply delete this row, and then I have a row over here that's valid. The reason I bring this up is because there are decisions that you're going to make as you're actually building your database. Now what I've got is a situation where this object ID doesn't work very well. And remember, this is unstructured data, so I can do whatever I want to do with this. So I could say, well, maybe let's go back to the table view of this, and I'm just going to trash this guy out of there. Delete. So he's flagged for deletion. Now I've got this one. And if I need to, I can now clone him. And I clone him, and now I've got this Triple Dipper here, and I've got an ability to now add. I can go ahead and I can edit these, and I can add in, let's say, the next one, Awesome Blossom Petals, which would be the next one, and there are, the description would be served with blossom sauce. Now, if you look at this, what do I actually have? Let's do the update. So if you look at what I've actually got here, I have a menu. Underneath restaurant menus, that's a specific menu for Chili's. It actually has only right now 2 items that are in it. And I don't even know, I didn't really say that these things were in the appetizers menu, but that actually is not that hard to do. So if I go back to the list view here, and I bring it back for editing, and I have this little plus here, I can now say add a field, and the field could be menu, well, I'm calling these menu groups, and I could throw in the menu group appetizers, and now it actually belongs to something. Now realize that in a real database, appetizers would have its own table, and you would have to have a foreign key relationship that's here. The foreign key relationship doesn't actually exist right now. So we have to look at this in kind of a different way. The other thing we'd have to do is look at and say, well, that only actually changed this one Triple Dipper to be in the appetizers menu. I would have to go in here and be able to add this to the next one also. But then once I did that, if I clone it, then the menu group would be, and you notice I'm not following my naming convention. Should probably be a little bit tighter here, but those are all things that you need to think about while you're constructing the data. How much do I want those things to be tight? But now I actually do have something here, and if I look at the table view, they've got that menu group that they belong to, and they have an object ID that they belong to, and they have a name. So now I've got queryable data in an actual specific format. These are the things that you're going to have to think about as you're using an unstructured or NoSQL database like MongoDB. However, this is queryable data. You can't actually get stuff in here, and you can query it. And it does model real data. And if you look over here, the appetizers and the structure of that are being duplicated over here in this MongoDB. So this is really only intended to get you kind of right off the bat started using MongoDB and starting to think about the issues that are associated with that. I'll have more videos that'll take you even further into how to do this, and actually videos on how to, once I create a whole lot of data here, I'll go ahead and make it so that we can look at how do we query this data and find things that we want. That actually is going to be important because the queries that you are able to do are going to have something to do with the way that you structure that data. So the structure of data doesn't become unimportant. Like many people will think in a NoSQL database, the structure is no longer important. It is still important. However, it has a richer flavor to it. But as we saw, we traded off that ability, completely traded off the ability to do many-to-many relationships, or really do a nice way to do many-to-many relationships. We've also really have a difficult time if we're going to be doing many-to-one relationships. And so those are doable, but they're a little bit more complex. Anyway, this is hopefully going to get you started in MongoDB and starting to think about how to structure data in very simple applications so that you are able to really work with NoSQL databases. Talk to you later. That's Dr. Ron Eaglin signing out. Good programming.